Hey guys, hope you all are doing well. Really exciting news. This is the second half of the semester. So everything we've gone over from lectures 1 to 12 will be on that midterm that's coming up. This is lecture 13. So this is, second half material. It's really exciting. Getting into Unit 4, and I'll explain a little bit why it's exciting. But I just want to go over what we've done so far and kind of just remind you what the trajectory of this course has been. So in Unit 1, we looked at different scientific disciplines. I explained what science is and how it's conducted. Remember, science doesn't prove anything, it only disproves. So if you can't disprove something, that general idea or hypothesis becomes a theory over time, right? So we learned about that. I got you up to date with different scientific terminology that I use a lot. Abiotic, biotic. We looked at, just some basics of science, describing pH, talking about atmospheric interactions, what the ozone is, what spectrums, life on Earth and just this Earth in general interact with. So we looked at, the electromagnetic spectrum, and we went through all of those. So just some basic, that was like physics. We looked at geology and how geology interacts with living things. And then we looked at graphs in Unit 1. So basically, Unit 1 was a lot of just getting you up to speed in, getting you up to speed with the language and the tools that scientists use. So if you got past that, we got into the extinction events. So Unit 2 was all about the extinction events. There's been 5 major extinction events prior to today's extinction event. And we went over the vast expanses of time and described the different extinction events. Remember, some were cataclysmic, volcanic eruptions, so geology has a very strong interaction with those. We have celestial objects like meteors, asteroids smashing into Earth and launching debris up in the air. And then we also realized that there was biological interactions as well, like in the late Devonian when vascular plants totally changed the biosphere. And that one, remember, that one took 25 million years. We learned about the Great Dying too, and how these extinction events, yes, 99% of all species that has evolved on Earth has gone extinct, but it's these extinction events that allow other organisms that don't die off there to go through a period of adaptive radiation. And we see that with the avian birds, and we see that with mammals. And we finish on the evolution of mammals and move into the evolution of humans, and that's when Unit 3 starts. So Unit 3, we talked about the Anthropocene, the rise of man, and how man has interacted with the planet since the dawn of time. Even before our species, even before Homo sapiens, we had closely related relatives, right, of different species of hominids, but hominids that have gone extinct. And it's these organisms, these species, right, that are very similar to us, that are walking upright, that are using fire. It's these individuals that are also interacting with the planet on a global scale, right? Because humans, we went everywhere, right? We succeeded to the point of actually moving around and inhabiting all of Earth's habitats. So we talk about the ancestral hominids and how they interacted with the planet, and then we get into the modern day society that is obviously causing, these catalyzing anthropogenic climate change on just a ridiculous scale. So we get into the entire hominid lineage and how we are catalyzing this current extinction event known as the Anthropocene. So we talked about the Anthropocene in Unit 3. We talked about coral bleaching, the disappearing of bees, the disappearing of many other insects, how these interactions are related to carbon sequestration and, other organisms like fungi went over too. So Unit 3 was actually quite depressing. I mean, it should have been if you don't really know what's going on and now you're realizing and seeing that many of Earth's ecosystems are crumbling, biodiversity is plummeting, and the actual functioning of these ecosystems are changing super fast. Not to mention deforestation and all these fires ensuing across the planet on a yearly basis. I mean, we didn't even get into like oil spills and those kind of cataclysmic events. So Unit 3 was depressing because, I can't sugarcoat it. I can't not talk about these issues that are happening to our planet. Now I realize that, and I tried to, also describe how researchers are envisioning solutions, and the fight's not over, right? We can still come together and help mitigate many of these interactions, but I have to be a straight shooter. I have to tell you what's going on. It would be a disservice to tell you that everything's going to be all right, because right now we're reaching that point of, if we don't actually do something now, we will see the extinction of many more Earth species. This Unit 4, which starts the new half of the semester, we go into the different biomes of our planet. And we will talk about living biomes to this day. So this is really cool because, yes, there are things crumbling, but in some parts of the world, there are these tiny little pockets of refugia, and there's forests that are over 2,000 years old, never been logged, right? And there's amazing organisms that have evolved such cool adaptations to live in these really unique habitats. So this unit, we're focusing on the amazing diversity of life and how awesome adaptations are. And it's supposed to, encourage you and help you realize that there is still so much to fight for, right? If we get together and realize the importance of these ecosystems, and we could protect them. And maybe, just maybe, if we start extending the range of these natural habitats, we'll get some of these endangered species, their population to increase. So this is going to be Unit 4, and starting off with an absolute banger, we're going to be looking at tropical rainforests today. So many of you might already know what a biome is. For those of you who don't, a biome is a large biological community that is living in a specific location at a specific time. And these could be rather large areas. And even if you've never even seen the biome, if you do have two pieces of information, if you know what the annual temperature is and the annual precipitation is, you can have a really good prediction of which biome you're actually looking at. So these two abiotic factors are going to be underlying themes in this unit: temperature and precipitation. If you know those two things, you pretty much know what species can live there. So a really important characteristic of each biome has to do with biodiversity. And we already talked about what biodiversity is. Biodiversity is the number and variety of different biological species. If the planet maintains a diverse array of different biomes, you can bet that there's going to be a lot of biodiversity that coincides with all of these different biomes. So biodiversity is another underlying theme. And again, this unit should invigorate you and help you realize that there's so much more to protect. This figure you will see over and over and over again. So I love this figure. You'll see it on exams. And basically, we have a lot of information on it. Those two factors, those two abiotic factors I talked about, we have precipitation, right? And we have temperature. So precipitation and temperature. Now, depending on where you look, there is clearly going to be a different range of precipitation and temperature. And with that, you can actually pinpoint all these different types of biomes that we will get into in this unit. So we are focusing on tropical rainforests today. And tropical rainforests, you can see, like their name suggests, they receive a lot of precipitation, right? So from 250 centimeters all the way up to about 475 centimeters of a year. So annual precipitation, right? Not only do they receive a lot of water, but they are relatively warm. Not just relatively warm, but pretty dang hot, right? So they are, they do not freeze at all, like our particular biome that we are in. And we are in the temperate forest biome if you live in Western New York, like I do. Now, what you will notice about this biome is that it isn't as hot as deserts and tropical thorn scrub and woodland, and even some tropical seasonal forests, right? You can see that the temperature slightly decreases. And it slightly decreases because of water. We know that water evaporates. And the reason why we sweat is for our body's heat to escape through that evaporation. So when little molecules of water evaporate and turn into the gaseous state, they take along with it some of our heat energy, right? So that is exactly happening in these tropical rainforests. It doesn't matter if the tropical rainforest lies directly on the equator during the hottest part of the year, right? Because it receives so much water, that biome has evaporation, and evaporation strips some of that heat away. So I really like how the authors of this figure, they nailed that. Right? So not as hot as a drier place, right? So we are going to get into all of these, and I really love how, you can decode and better understand the areas of each of these biomes. Another thing to notice is this desert shape. You will notice that the temperatures of a desert can vary the most out of any other biome. And this is because, again, this figure does not, this is because a desert biome is only dependent on the amount of precipitation. So we define deserts solely on precipitation. There are Arctic deserts. There are polar deserts that do not receive any snow, any rain at all. Just like extremely minimal precipitation. And you can obviously understand that at the poles it is very cold, right? So this desert biome has a wide range of temperature. And guess what? Even in more, like the Sahara, for example, because there's no water, water works both ways here. Because there's no water in these ecosystems, as soon as the sun sets in really dry habitats, it gets freezing cold. Water, moisture in soil, moisture in a lot of plant material actually insulates that area, right? Because water has what? A high specific heat, right? Water has a high specific heat. It holds on to heat really well. It takes a lot of energy to heat up. But once you get that heat energy into water, it takes a long time for that heat to dissipate. So when there's no water, it gets really hot in the daytime and really cold when there is no sun. So there's that. So we'll go over many other, little patterns in this figure as this unit progresses. But again, main thing here is that two abiotic factors drive what biome you actually see. So precipitation and temperature. Now zooming out to the biosphere, you see all these different ecosystems. You see all these different biomes, and you can see the interaction with latitude, right? So you can notice that a lot of throughout the equator, you have these dark green rainforest regions, these tropical rainforests. And that is because the position on the equator along, the entire biosphere, you get a lot of sunlight. Clearly, it's right on the equator. Most sunlight, on the planet hits the positions around the equator. And not only do you get a lot of sunlight, but you also get a lot of precipitation. And this has to do with, the Coriolis effect and these Hadley cells around the tropics. So if you remember from Unit 1, we actually have a lot of deserts at the tropics. And this is because of really complex wind patterns. As the Earth spins, the moisture from the tropics actually moves towards the equator on either tropic, right? So because of that, moisture is pulled from the tropics and pushed right onto the equator, right? So I think that's really cool. Look at how gigantic the Sahara Desert is. Absolutely massive. Now, another thing you can see is that more north of us, we have these boreal forests. So boreal ecosystems dominated by pine and spruce. You have a lot of large mammals, and you can see it's colder up here, and there are specific species assemblages at that latitude. If you're in Western New York or you live on the East Coast, you are going to be mainly living in a temperate broadleaf mixed deciduous forest. We have the grasslands of the Midwest, also grasslands throughout this part of Asia. And then the west coast of our country gets a lot of diversity. So this is a very mountainous region over here, and you could see that mountains also interact heavily with the different biomes. Here's another, the Andes are right here, right? And you could see that as you go up in elevation, and here we have Mount Everest, right? And Mount Everest is a main reason why you have the Gobi Desert right here, because water moving up through India hits the Himalayas and just stops right there. And you can actually see, because this sharp increase in altitude, you get these biomes that are in this thin line, right? So contrary to what many people believe, Everest is actually pretty south. Like Mount Everest is much more southern than Western New York. It's actually kind of on the same latitude of Florida. So, a lot of people that are, ill-advised and want to summit Everest, obviously you don't fly right to the mountain. You can fly in several countries because the Himalayas stretches a vast distance. But, if you just have winter gear, you're going to be really ill-prepared when you're not up in elevation. It's actually rather wet and rather hot. And you could tell right here we have tropical rainforests that go, directly into temperate broadleaf forests. There should be a thin line of boreal forest, and then you get into like rock and icy and more alpine biomes. So I really like that idea too. So think about latitude, think about topography when you're looking at this graph or this figure, and it's just really cool to focus on maybe a part of the world that you went on vacation and look at the biome, and then just cool. I really like this figure. So like I just mentioned, biomes vary with latitude. Many temperature-controlled biomes occur in latitudinal bands, like I was just talking about, like the boreal forests of Canada and Russia and Siberia. Tropical forests clearly near the equator. Expansive grasslands lie near just beyond the tropics. And many biomes are even named for their latitude, like tropical rainforests or Arctic tundras. Now, like I was describing with elevation, this term is actually has its own term. It's called vertical zonation. So temperature and precipitation will change with elevation, just as it changes with latitude. So in a mountainous region, temperatures are going to be cooler, and the precipitation is usually much higher in higher elevations. Mountains are generally cooler and often wetter than low elevation regions. So vertical zonation is the term applied to vegetation zones which are defined by altitude. And a great example of vertical zonation is if you were to walk 1,000 kilometers from Fresno, which is, the middle of a desert, to Mount Whitney in California. So in this short distance, if you actually walk, let's be honest, if you drove out your window, as you go up in elevation, you see plant assemblages change. Because the higher you go, the cooler it gets, the more moisture it gets, and you get to see this vertical zonation firsthand. And it's really cool. My favorite part is to see the transitional latitudes. So you might not have heard this term before, but depending on your position on Earth, there are different tree line heights. So a tree line is a area on a high elevation region in which no more trees can grow. There is literal limitations to that specific species of tree living at that location. So I like seeing those transitional spots when you're looking at vertical zonation. These are more figures that we will see throughout this unit. These are very important. So annual temperature and precipitation levels in terrestrial biomes. We have temperature and we have the yearly seasonality here. The red months are months above freezing. So you can see in San Diego, it never freezes. The red circles are temperature and the blue circles are precipitation. So from August all the way to November, which is much of the year, you actually have evaporation exceeding precipitation. So it still rains throughout these months, but evaporation actually exceeds precipitation, right? So these areas are very dry. You're going to have a specific biome that has adaptations to live without much water. Now, I want to get to this dark blue, and to that we have to look at Brazil. Brazil, a tropical rainforest, and this dark blue signifies a scale change. So you can see the scale is regular here, 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. And then it rains so much in Brazil that to fit these data on this graph, they had to do a scale change. Now it's interesting because instead of having the 4 seasons that we have, tropical rainforests, they really only have a wet season and a dry season. And in this particular location, it's really not much of a dry season. I mean, precipitation always is greater than evaporation. You do get a dip here, but that scale change definitely offsets that dry season. Here, this is exactly what our graph would look like if you're living in Western New York. Possibly a few more frozen months, right? Maybe one more frozen month, because we are a little more northern than Philadelphia, just a tad though. And I really like this figure because you get to see the seasonality, right? So this shows the latitude that we are at, and how how temperature is coincided with the tilt and the position of where you're living, right? So the tilt of the Earth, because of that, we have obviously these months. This position of the planet is pointed towards the sun, and then these colder months we are pointed away from the sun. So I like that bell-shaped curve. Precipitation is always greater than evaporation, and this is definitely going to allow both deciduous trees and conifer trees to live here. So really cool. I like these figures a lot. You will see them over and over again. So now we're going to focus on tropical rainforests. So here we have this particular tropical rainforest. Throughout the year, clearly you get that scale change. You get way more precipitation than evaporation. And how cool does that look? Just constant fogs and clouds. Now, obviously, tropical rainforests occur where rainfall is abundant, and it's going to be more than 200 centimeters per year. Temperatures are going to be warm to hot year-round, so you're never going to get freezing, right? 0 months are freezing. The temperature stays extremely constant. Precipitation is always going to be high in these tropical biomes, and again, that 200 centimeter mark. Now these are 300 centimeters. So in this particular month, if this was exactly 300 millimeters, that's actually 30 centimeters. So you could see, you get definitely 200 centimeters per year in this particular biome. Again, looking at this figure again, just a reminder, you're going to see this figure so much. Now, I've talked about going to Costa Rica. I've been there 3 times. It's what I really love to do. It's what I really love to spend my money on. Not just Costa Rica, but traveling. But Costa Rica has a really special place in my heart because it really just made me feel like I didn't know anything about the natural world. It made me feel like I was in the movie Avatar, which I love. And it is a magical, magical place if you love plants, if you love fungi, and if you love animals. So check all those boxes. So now I just want to take the time to go over some of those species that I've encountered in my travels to a tropical rainforest. My trip would not be complete if I didn't find an old growth ceiba tree. So in the native tongue, like the, not the Spanish, the European influenced Spanish tongue, but the actual native language of Costa Rican natives, you have the name of ceiba actually refers to the tree of life. And you can notice that like its branches look like it has all these leaves on them. Now those are actually epiphytes. And an epiphyte is a plant that actually lives on the surface of another plant. So the tree of life is a really fitting native name because it allows literally thousands of species to live on it. Thousands of, not individuals, thousands of different species can epiphytically live on a single ceiba tree. So these are so cool. This is a picture that I took, and it just fills me with so much joy and happiness knowing that there are old growth ceiba trees that are really old. I don't actually know how old they are. It's much harder to actually date trees in the tropics because they don't really have this. They have growth rings, but they're not seasonal growth rings like we do with like a white oak that's growing, in my backyard, in a temperate seasonal place. So it's hard to actually date these trees, but they can be easily 500 years old, and they support not only epiphytes but just a wide diversity of different animals as well. But to talk about some more of these epiphytes, the orchid on the right is an orchid that I actually found on a hike in Costa Rica. I love this orchid. It's so cool. And yes, it is an epiphyte. Many orchids are epiphytic. Another plant I want to focus on are these tiny little lines you see. These are actually vines, and these are actually a plant called a strangler fig. So a strangler fig is a type of ficus, a fig tree, and the fruit figs. Many animals love them. So monkeys will pick up these fig fruits, they'll climb all over these ceiba trees, and they'll poop those seeds out in the canopy. Now, interestingly enough, this is exactly what the ficus tree, with these strangler fig trees, want those monkeys to do. Because they don't germinate and grow on the ground like many other plants that you are familiar with. They actually germinate in the treetops here. And then they extend this vine down. And that vine, it takes some time to reach the ground, especially when you're looking at one of these older ceiba trees. So it does take years for them to fully grow and actually touch the ground. Once they touch the ground, they have much more available nutrients to them, and they could then really robustly start growing. And eventually, these strangler figs, they will actually choke the tree, literally choke the tree. So as those vines finally touch the ground, they then start absorbing much more nutrients, they grow much more faster, and they will actually strangle the tree to the point where it actually gets strangled. Like water can no longer travel up in the host's tree, in this host tree. And many times what you are left with is the decomposition of the host, and you could actually step inside a strangler fig and look up. And I've actually done this. This isn't my picture, but I actually have a picture like this. I don't know why I didn't add it. And yeah, so you can literally stand where its host once lived. Now, another really interesting thing, if we had something that did this in North America and in our own backyard, you wouldn't see this hollow strangler fig, even if there were strangler figs around here, because decomposition happens much more slowly in temperate biomes. right? It's colder throughout the winter. During the winter, everything really slows down, and then you only have 6-7 months of growth for different species of fungi and bacteria to break down that woody debris. In the tropics, decomposition occurs lightning fast. For one, it's super competitive here. So animals and all these different organisms are fighting for whatever they can get their hands on. And then two, you get that temperature. That temperature just allows decomposition. Next to temperature, a third thing, you get a ton of moisture. Moisture also enhances decomposition. So this is a great example of a parasitic relationship. One partner benefits, the fig tree gets a place to stay. And another thing that we haven't talked about yet is that because it lives this lifestyle, instead of growing on the ground and growing up, it gets its life started in the canopy. In the canopy, there's actually much more light up there, right? So it benefits from living high up in the canopy, and it gets all this light. So it has this structural support. The host plant doesn't receive anything good except eventually gets strangled. So you can totally tell this is a parasitic relationship. So these are pictures that I actually took. This is a spider monkey on the right. It is the largest New World monkey. So a New World monkey, New World monkeys, when you hear that term New World, that refers to North and South America as well as Central America. Remember, Costa Rica is in Central America. So the Americas. Old world organisms, not just monkeys, but old world organisms refers to Europe, Africa, and Asia. So those organisms are referred to as old world. So the spider monkey has an arm span of nearly 5 feet. Larger individuals can be like 5.5 feet long. Their arm span is actually longer than their entire body, which makes sense because they are arboreal, right? They're living in their trees, in these trees, their entire life. Those long arms help them move around these 3D complex environments. So spider monkeys are actually rather large. You don't want to, obviously you don't want to mess with any wildlife, but you're a little actually intimidated. And I actually got pooped on, legit. On Valentine's Day, actually, I got pooped on 2 years ago. Not like directly pooped on, but a group of spider monkeys, they got angry at this little capuchin monkey and literally started throwing poop at it, and I was underneath it. So I didn't get like rocked with poop, just a little bit of poop. But hey, I get a cool story to tell, I guess. But yeah, so these are spider monkeys, really, really cool. And you get these howler monkeys. Again, these looked a little more docile. They weren't moving as much as the spider monkeys, who were just like, they were like gang members. I mean, probably because of the interaction that I saw, they were just like throwing their poop at this little capuchin monkey. It was nuts. But the reason why we see monkeys in tropical rainforests is because tropical rainforests produce a lot of fruit. And these mammals require a ton of energy. If you don't have systems in place that produce a lot of fruit, if there's not a lot of primary productivity due to sunlight or moisture, you're just not going to get large mammals like really active monkeys, right? Another interaction I want to talk about is this amazing tree that I encountered. Again, this is another picture I took. I'm really proud of it. I really like that. There are different macaws and this really cool bird called the Montezuma oropendula. And oropendula refers to its gold tail. Oro means gold. So the Montezuma oropendula and these macaws, and they are living in these almondro trees. And almondro trees, it means almond. They're not true almonds like the almonds we eat, but they are an incredible tree. And they are actually legumes. And you can actually see some little pods. So whenever you see a plant that produces like a bean-like pod, that's actually a legume. And legumes, we'll get into that in just like the next slide, but legumes are really important, especially for tropical rainforests. So I wanted to describe this term, this ecological term called spatial heterogeneity. And that term means that resources are not spread out evenly in nature. So homogeneity is when everything is the same. And whenever I talk to students about something that's homogeneous, I talk about mayonnaise, because mayonnaise is literally homogenized. There is air that has been whipped into oil, and those two materials have become one. They have become homogenized, right? Spatial heterogeneity is the opposite of that. It's little pockets of different organisms. For example, this legume, this almondro tree. So when you find an almondro tree, and they are rather rare because they've been logged so much, but you actually know you're seeing something that's special, because there are so many different organisms that are living and feeding around this tree. It's like this hot spot. And the reason why it's been logged is because it has this really beautiful and extremely strong wood. So really another interesting idea that I'm tying into, I know there's a lot of different ideas on this slide here, but these, like Costa Rica, it actually receives most of its money not through exporting goods like China or the US, but allowing ecotourism. So they get most of their money from people like me that travel there to go see their animals. And they've realized this early on, within the past 30, 40 years, probably more like 30 years. And they realize the importance of protecting really important species, right? Keystone species, organisms that provide a lot of services to other organisms of the area. And they realize that the almondro tree supports all these different birds, all these different monkeys, and not to mention it's a legume. Again, we'll get into that in just a bit. But they started to protect these trees. So now, if you get caught cutting down an almondro tree, you get $100,000 fine in American. So that is, it's not like the Costa Rican dollar isn't worth much. It's actually pretty comparable to the US dollar, but that is still a lot of money for cutting down a tree. Even still, there are these like operations that happen in which they'll, tree poachers will identify an almondro tree, and they'll go in and they'll go out, and there's no signs. They're in and out during the night. Like, it's really crazy. But if you get caught, it's $100,000 fine. And remember this term, spatial heterogeneity. So these trees are not spaced equally in these biomes. They're spaced kind of randomly, and they're also kind of rare. So I mentioned this bird, and this is still on the almondro tree. This is its nest, and you can actually see some building material for these really cool hanging nests. I kind of want a giant version for me. I think that would be really cool. But a legume is a really special plant because it fixes nitrogen. And if you remember, the two main limiting resources on our planet for plants is phosphorus and nitrogen. So this lineage of plants, the legumes within the family Fabaceae, they have evolved this really unique interaction with bacteria. So as you can see in this figure, kind of like mycorrhiza, because we learned about mycorrhiza a lot more last lecture, this is kind of like mycorrhiza. The plants actually house these little nodules, and in those little nodules, you get these bacteria that live in these little bacteria motels on the roots of legumes. And the plant supplies its bacteria, just like mycorrhiza, with sugars from photosynthesis, and in return, the bacteria fix nitrogen. So nitrogen is actually the most abundant gas in our atmosphere. I think it's like upwards of 70% we're breathing in of nitrogen each breath. And why would that be a limiting nutrient? Well, nitrogen in its gaseous state is not available to plants. Nitrogen has to be turned into, a different form of nitrogen, like a nitrate, nitrite. So bacteria have evolved, specialized bacteria has evolved to actually take this gaseous phase of nitrogen and fix it into a usable biological form. So this is an amazing mutualism in which the bacteria receives a house to live in, as well as carbohydrates, and the plant then gets much of the nitrogen that the usable nitrogen that the bacteria fix from this unusable gaseous form. So really, really cool interaction. And so, we talk about habitat heterogeneity. These almonds, they're not true almonds again. They feed so many types of birds. They're, not only just food, but these trees are where many of these birds actually live. And now you get this other interaction of this plant actually inputting nitrogen into these soils, right? So this plant, because it's photosynthesizing there and because it has this relationship with bacteria, the soil around this tree, regardless of the nutrient-rich droppings promoted by, all these birds living here, around the tree, the levels of nitrogen skyrocket, right? And something very important to know, and contrary to what many believe about these specific biomes, these rainforests, are that the soils of tropical rainforests are actually nutrient depleted, right? So you would think that these biomes with all these different plants, all these different animals, bright colors, liveliness, you would think that the soils are super rich, getting all this water. But in fact, again, water actually washes those nutrients away, right? It rains so much that excess of water actually washes nutrients away into freshwater streams and then finally into fresh bodies of water. So again, contrary to what many people believe, this almondro tree with its nitrogen fixing bacteria, because it's a legume, is really important to the ecosystem in which it is living in, right? So I really love that idea. I love that idea because we're thinking and looking at all these interactions, and now we're looking underneath the soil surface, right? Where many people don't even, fathom the interactions that are going down under there. So again, spatial heterogeneity, right? There is heterogeneity throughout many of these biomes that we're going to talk about. Now, there are going to be a ton of different predators in these tropical rainforests. They interact with the ecosystem through top-down control. they level the playing field and thus allow more biodiversity. So in these biomes, you see big cats, you see predatory birds, you see insect species like army ants, as well as many different reptiles and poisonous snakes. So I didn't take any of these pictures, but you have mountain lions, you have, leopards, not leopards, just a jaguar. Leopards are from the old world cats. And this really cool feline, the jaguarundi. So, I mean, if this thing wouldn't maul your face off, I think it'd make a pretty cool pet. But, leave the native fauna in its spot. Really cool. I want you guys to look up pictures of harpy eagles. They have these claws that are larger than the human hand. They actually, the talons itself are much longer than a bear claw, like a grizzly bear claw. Seriously, look up harpy eagles. They eat monkeys. They eat monkeys for fun. They literally take these talons and they crush monkeys' skulls. They are the most, I think they're one of the most dense birds on the planet. So they're huge, but again, being in a tropical rainforest, their wingspan can't be too wide because they have to maneuver through the canopy. But they are absolutely massive and dense birds compared to many other predatory birds. So really, really cool. Check out harpy eagles. I mean, they will knock your socks off. They are so cool. This is actually a picture I took. This is a pit viper, a type of pit viper. And actually these are the same species, but they have just a different coloration, which is really unique and interesting to me because I was really shocked that they were the same species. But one has this camouflaged, these camouflage scales, and then you have this aposematic coloration. So they are really docile, but I was with a guide that told me that there was no antidote for this. So if it did kill us, if it did bite us, it would kill us. But again, think about top-down control and how important predators are in balancing these ecosystems, leveling the playing field. They disallow, some certain herbivores to grow their population too much. They balance the ecosystem and allow more biodiversity. There's this really cool video of army ants. I'll leave this link. This will be link number 1. Really, really cool. So this is probably one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. I was hiking up an ancient volcano, and I looked behind me, and it was just this fog that has rolled in. I felt like I was in Jurassic Park. All these epiphytes, and you could tell these are different plant species, right? There are several ferns and orchids and arums and mosses and lichens. It just goes on and on and on. If you're into botany, you need to check out these tropical rainforests. And I actually found a sloth. This is a picture I took through binoculars, so it's not very sharp. Did not take this picture, but there are sloths in Costa Rica, and it's living in both of these pictures. It's hanging from one of its preferred trees, the Cecropia tree, and the Cecropia trees and sloths and these specific moths engage in this really complex mutualism that I'm going to explain to you. Remember, the natural world, even extant species, display some just awe-inspiring interactions that I hope invigorate you and just, I love telling these stories. So sloths, you guys know, actually, wow, that's so weird. I grabbed this mug today, and it's literally from Costa Rica. That's awesome. Sloth mug. So funny. Sloths actually have a very low metabolism, so they don't just move slow. Their digestion is slow, and they just obviously, the Spanish word for sloth is just lazy, peligroso, I believe. Because they have such a slow metabolism, they only poop once a week. But instead of pooping from the safety of the treetop, like right here, it actually expends a lot of energy to crawl down the tree, and it poops at the base of the tree. Now this puts this animal at severe risk. So researchers were just like, and this, they found this out like within the last 15, 20 years. And researchers were just like, why don't these darn animals just poop from the trees? Because they're more likely to die from a predator spotting them, and they literally can't defend themselves. Like, they're so slow. Researchers were just bewildered. Well, they realized that there was actually this really complex mutualism going on. So another thing that you'll realize is that when you're looking at a sloth, you'll see like bits of green. If you ever get really close to a sloth, they smell. Their fur is super filthy, and it actually contains its own little miniature biome, sloth fur. And because they move so slow, things like algae can grow there. And these algae also allow these moth larvae to live there as well. So researchers actually found out that there are these moth communities living on their fur. And the moth larvae actually feed on the algae as well as drink from that algae. So these researchers found out that this behavior actually maintains algal growth. So as the sloth travels down the tree, the Cecropia tree, to defecate, mature moths that matured from their larval state, they hop off directly into the sloth's poo, where they then feed more and their fitness goes up, and then they could then lay their eggs, and then the next week when the sloth comes back down, those eggs can then traverse and kind of hop onto the sloth's fur. Now, the moths themselves defecate while they're living in the sloth's fur, and that actually fertilizes their fur, and it allows different algae to grow on their fur. So by maintaining moths through climbing down the tree, the mature moths hop off, the immature moths hop on and keep fertilizing their algae. This maintains this miniature biome on their fur. And some other benefits to the sloth are that green coloration helps them become more blend in their environment. It camouflages them. And additionally, the sloths themselves actually can eat some of this really nutritious algae, and they also, because there's algae on them, the algae covered fur actually soaks up water. So if it's like really foggy out, their fur will soak up that water, and they can actually drink from their own fur. So extremely beneficial for a slow moving animal that would otherwise have to climb down the tree and find liquid water. So really, really crazy. And this would be called a tripartite mutualism. So tripartite, 3 different species. So you have the moth, you have the sloth, and you have the algae. And they kind of work in this crescendo of events that allow them to all have enhanced fitness. So really, really cool. I'll leave this video as link number 2. So we have army ants, link 1, fungal farming ants, link 2. These are pictures that I both took. Really proud of this one. Really got in close there. Looks pretty sharp. I wish its head was sharp and not its abdomen, but it's still a really cool photo. Now these ants are so cool, and you'll learn about it in the video, but just really briefly, fungal farming ants do exactly what this name suggests. They cut pieces of plant tissue. They take it into their nests that, like I said, can have 6 million individuals living in these huge, like size of my room nests. I mean, some of these nests are absolutely gargantuan. Like to the point where if you follow, because that you can follow these ants back to their nest. And I did that, and I was like, where is the nest? And I was standing on top of this absolutely massive fungal farming ant nest. And what they do is they take these parts of plant tissues, and it's not just leaves. I've seen them take like flowers too, and different types of plant material down into their nest. And within these eusocial insects, you actually have like a caste system. So right here, you can see these are 2 smaller individuals, and this is a larger worker ant. So these worker ants have the mandibles to actually cut these leaf tissues and carry them back. And then you get these are actually bodyguard ants that are helping to guard this ant from parasitic wasps. So that's their role. There are smaller ants that actually process the plant tissue. They'll grind it in their teeth, in their mandibles, into a pulp, and then place it in these like agricultural centers in their nest. And then they'll spread fungal spores. And these particular fungal spores, they grow and then they feed the actual colony. So they're actually farming, they're taking plant material, they're growing fungus on it, and they're eating the fungus. Now, like other ants that you might know about, queen ants, they produce diploid queens. So a queen ant, basically all the workers are going to be male. They're going to be haploid males. They're going to contain just half of the female's genome. Now there are males it mates with, just a select few males that don't do any work except mate with the queen. And when she mates with the queen, when they mate with the queen actually stores some of this sperm. And then for whatever reason, whatever conditions, sometimes she actually fertilizes her eggs with that sperm, and that fertilization actually creates these like sister queens. And those queens have wings, and their goal is to fly and start their own colonies. And as a sister queen flies away, she goes to the fungal garden and she takes a little chunk of this fungus plant mixture and she stores it in this special pouch, and she has to nurture this fungus, and that's the first thing she does. So she finds a suitable little part of this biome, and she excavates a little tunnel, and the first thing she does is spits out that fungal mass, and she starts fertilizing it and making sure that she's keeping it alive, because if that fungus dies, everybody will eventually die. So then she lays some more eggs. You get the first workers that excavate a little bit more, and you get the colony that actually forms. So it's really fascinating. I love finding these ants. And actually they occur in like the southern tip of Florida and in parts of Texas as well. So even in America, we get some fungal farming ants. And they have the largest colonies of any insect, which is just crazy. And I already described this. If you zoom out the ecosystem as a whole, we now know that rainforests have nutrient poor soils. There's so much biomass that much of the nutrients are actually locked up in living structures like these trees here. So the soils are not going to be nutrient rich because everything is already locked up. There are adaptations to poor nutrient abundance. You get rapid decomposition, you get surface roots, and you get aerial hyphae. So I already talked about rapid decomposition. But when you hike in these biomes, you will see these surface roots. You'll actually have to step over roots. There is not a strong selection pressure to drive these roots in deep layers of the soil. One being that it rains so much that roots don't have to go far to get water, right? And another reason is that decomposition rates are so fast and much of the nutrients are actually near the soil surface where, debris just falls and then is quickly used up by organisms at the surface. There's not a reservoir of nutrients in deeper soil horizons. For that reason, plants in tropical rainforests, they tend to have these surface roots, right? So that is really cool. And again, these surface roots actually provide a little more habitat heterogeneity. You get these tiny little micro habitats, right? So a lot of times you'll see like bats that really love to during the day they'll be sleeping in these little aerial root crevices. So again, more habitat heterogeneity, which is going to increase biodiversity. Now, hyphae is the root-like structures of fungi. And instead of fungi waiting for debris at the soil surface, a really amazing adaptation is to actually produce hyphae that extend from branches like this. So this is hyphae that is collecting dead woody and leaf-like debris before it even touches the ground. That's how competitive it is in these ecosystems. Decomposition rates are so fast that certain fungi has evolved that produce aerial hyphae. Why wait to compete for ground detritus when you can catch it right here? And a new study actually showed that these microhabitats actually promote insect and spider diversity. So having aerial hyphae actually increases this 3D habitat for many insect species. So I absolutely love tropical rainforests. Again, we looked at tropical rainforests today. So cool. Those were some species I've encountered. Those are some adaptations that have evolved. I hope you guys liked this lecture. I know you're going to like this unit if you somewhat have liked this class so far. Keep up to date with your readings and such and your homework, and I will catch you very shortly.